Ladies and gentlemen, it is time for prize fighters, circus freaks, and gangsters. I'm Jamie.
And I'm Greta.
And today we are discussing the greatest century, the nastiest century, the 19th century. The century that birthed sports, science, and a bunch of scams. This week's topic, 1999's The Mummy. We're going to discuss the historicity of this amazing Stephen Sommers film, suggested by Greta, because it is beloved by you.
It is, and I think one of the more fun things it does is it just really talks about how right America thought it was at this point in time. They knew it all, they understood the whole world, and they were going to show you how it was done.
They absolutely were.
You know, different from now, of course.
No. It's much different now. We're much more evolved at this point. And through the works of Stephen Sommers, can we just discuss this man who has produced not just The Mummy, but The Mummy 2, Van Helsing, G.I. Joe 2, which I will say I tried to make a drinking game out of G.I. Joe 2, and my ex-girlfriend and I, we did a shot every time Channing Tatum flexed his jaw muscle, thinking it was going to be funny. And we almost got alcohol poisoning. We both passed out about a half hour into the movie. So I have no idea how that movie ended. But it did have Assam in it. And then he also made The Jungle Book, which was quite a phenomenal movie. And actually, if we're going to subject ourselves to more of Stephen Sommers, I suggest we watch The Jungle Book. I have no experience with Rudyard Kipling.
Really? Okay, because, talk about your icons of the 19th century. He were one, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I never saw the cartoon one. I know the bear is Babu, and that is as far as my knowledge of The Jungle Book goes.
It's Baloo, but that's okay.
Oh, well then, there you go. I know zero about it. So Stephen Sommers remade a 1932 film, which to me is famous in like the history of horror movies because the zombie leg drag actually comes from The Mummy.
Ah, okay. That totally makes sense. And then, of course, that 1932 film came from the writings of like H. Rider Haggard and
Sir Arthur Conan Doyle.
Yes, and sort of their kind of like the mysteries of the ancient world coming back to haunt us.
Yeah, Universal loved, in 1931, they had Dracula, they had Frankenstein, and they wanted another movie set in Egypt because...
sort of a monster movie,
Yes, because the tomb of Tutankhamun had been opened in 1922, and so Egyptology was a really big deal at that time.
Yeah, in a kind of a way, the opening of Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922 is kind of this tipping point where archaeology goes from almost entirely an amateur activity to one that starts to, Tutankhamun really makes everybody straighten up and fly right and sort of start to professionalize it for real.
You know, that's a really fun, when you talk about amateur versus professional, usually the distinction is made in sport. And I think that it's fun to point out here that, and I've made this point in my writing in the past, that the distinction between amateur and professional was made in sport specifically to divide lower class from upper class, or lower class and middle class from upper class. And they really essentially did the same exact thing with academics.
Totally. I mean, it used to be if you were an amateur Egyptologist, you had to be filthy, stinking rich in your own right to take this up as a hobby.
Yeah, and basically turn your house into a museum.
Which is totally what people did.
And so there was another guy, an Italian guy, whose story got wrapped up in this kind of Egyptology mythology that they were trying to build. His name was Cagliostro. Do you know this guy? He was the Italian Rasputin.
I do not know. New name on me.
So he, whereas Rasputin was a kind of a bullshitter faith healer, this guy was more of an alchemist, bullshitter, And then he was a philanthropist at the end of his life and started a bunch of hospitals and stuff like that. But so they took a story of how this guy was trying to extend his own life through the application of various nitrate mixtures. And Universal commissioned this movie, this Egypt movie. But the best that he could do initially was a 9-page treatment on this guy, Cagliostro, trying to turn himself immortal. And then they hired the guy, and I'm only bringing this up because I want to point out the discrepancy between the 1999 Mummy and 1932.
Okay.
So they hired the guy who took Dracula from the original story, took it to the stage, and he also wrote the film treatment for it.
Okay.
And he also wrote the original film treatment for Frankenstein. And he wrote all of these other crazy books. So this man was the dude. And then they hired the cinematographer from Dracula and the cinematographer from, he was also the guy on Metropolis. So this was the greatest cinematographer of the era. And they made The Mummy using the greatest people that they could possibly find in the industry at that time. And then we have the 1999 film.
Yes. Which, even though there's some hints in there that this is taking place after World War I, but who cares, whatever, it really sort of epitomizes what's going on in Egyptology, in Egypt, and how everybody's just running willy-nilly, roughshod over the countryside, digging up whatever the hell they want to.
Oh, you're not taking my bait at all that they took a completely unknown man who really had no business making this film, who had he had two Huck and Finn movies under his belt, and they were like, yeah, go ahead and make this thing.
Well, I think at the time they weren't really expecting great things out of it.
Well, that may be. It was, I will say, I agree with Roger Ebert. It was, if not good, it was at least entertaining. It was a popcorn film.
Oh, it's totally a popcorn film. It's the complete comic book of a movie. And so there's a lot of historicity in terms of the legendary stuff that's BS, but a lot of just the characters and their situations totally are the epitome of sort of the 19th century and how America was interacting with the rest of the world.
And I will definitely agree with you there. Where there was a lot, really this movie was as deep as a puddle, but they nailed the history.
Very true.
They nailed the history. They really crushed it. It was awesome. So it's set in 1926. And 1926 wasn't a very interesting year in my knowledge, and it falls a little outside of our scope. But
right.
I have to say that our opening scene is not set in 1926. So why don't you say
No. So the opening scene is we're back in ancient Egypt, and they're building the pyramids, and they're building the Sphinx, and it's all cartoony and CGI, and who cares? And we get to learn about how the Pharaoh's favorite side piece is super duper body painted, so that nobody ever gets to touch her. And all I could ever think was poor lady, doesn't she ever get to sit down?
Yeah, the gold leaf was really, they went hard on that. Where would you even, could you make gold paint back then? I guess with zinc, right? It could have been possible.
Oh, no, at that point, the Egyptians were actually digging up gold dust a lot of places. Yeah, so there was a lot of gold in ancient Egypt, and using it as a pigment was a thing.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, that makes sense. I guess you would get the gold dust a lot from panning, right?
Yeah. And so, you talk about Jason and the Golden Fleece. They would put sheepskins, the wool, into rivers that were known to have gold dust in it. And that was the whole thing. The sheepskin would turn golden by filtering the gold dust out of the water.
Ah, that's very cool. That must have been a heavy sweater.
Yeah. Right. And so they would mix the gold with animal fat. And so that's how they were making the paint.
Ah. Stinky,
yeah.
But effective.
Well, they would render it, and they would put flower essences in it, and so that was a whole thing.
I'm sure that it wasn't stinky because in the 3,000 years that they had a stable society, I'm sure they had time to work that sort of laundry situation out.
But yeah, so anyway, we get to find out that side piece actually has her own side piece, and it's the main priest of the Egyptian temple, and he is a bad dude.
He is, and so I'm looking at it, and I was like, "Ooh, Billy Zane's in this movie." And the entire movie, I thought this was Billy Zane, and then I just started writing, "Not Billy Zane." I never did find out what his name is, but I am still convinced that this man is Billy Zane in disguise.
Yeah, except Billy Zane has very distinctive earlobes, and those are not Billy Zane's earlobes.
Wow. All right. So we've discovered the president of the Billy Zane fan club, I guess.
Not so much a fan club. Like, for whatever reason, like his earlobes are very distinctive to me. Anyway, it's Arnold Vosloo.
We're gonna have to delve into that in its own episode.
I don't
The Billy Zane earlobe episode.
I don't know. It's how do you tell all the bald guys apart? I don't know.
Their hawk-like nose and other various distinctive features, his lantern-like jawline. I mean, basically, the man is just a collection of Pulp Fiction descriptive terms for a man's face, and you're like, oh, but his earlobes.
What?
Very distinctive.
They are.
And yet you didn't describe them. Other than saying they were distinctive. All right.
Okay, so anyway.
So not Billy Zane is Imhotep.
Yes. And they find out that he and Anaxunamun, the pretty lady in all the body paint, are having a thing. And so it all goes down bad. And he gets killed and she gets killed. And they get locked away under terrible, terrible curses.
And so he actually gets mummified alive. And I went and did a little research because I was like, I don't know anything about mummies. I've always just been bored by them. And but Egyptians did not believe in resurrection of mummies. That process was to carry the soul into the afterlife, and they knew that resurrection was impossible. So the mummies had all their organs pulled out. But in this thing, they mummify not Billy Zane. And then they have him, then they cover him in these scarabs, and the scarabs eat him. And they're flesh-eating scarabs.
Alive in his coffin. It's like, yeah.
Yes. And so there actually was like a basis for this kind of execution scene, and it was a conspiracy to kill Ramses III. Not that it really matters, but the flesh-eating scarabs, those only exist in North America, and they only eat like very, very dead things. Things that have been dead for a couple of weeks, but they're used to clean skeletons for like anatomy and stuff, which I find fascinating.
Yeah, no,
and you probably already knew that.
I mean, it's really cool. And again, like all of the mythology that they're using in this movie is just bogus nonsense, but who cares?
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, you have to build a ghost story somehow, and so there has to be some hoodoo nonsense in it, and I mean, but they still, it's so close, even down to the flesh-eating scarabs. Like, there are flesh-eating scarabs, so this was pretty dead on. I enjoyed it.
And they do actually do a really good job of creating a mythology that's similar to the kind of mistaken mythologies that were being created in the 18th and 19th century as people were sort of getting these bits and pieces of Egyptian knowledge and sort of starting to learn to be able to read the language and, you know, reading the Greek and Roman accounts of what was going on. They would come up with these sort of like half-baked, oh, this is the way things work. And so this was completely in keeping in the way people were thinking of Egypt in the 19th century.
Yeah, and frankly, when you're not 100% obsessed with getting every detail right like a modern historian, if you get the general story right and you're carrying the person's memory along, then you're getting the gist of it right anyway. So I can see how, you know, like when they used Imhotep because that was the name of probably the most famous advisor to any Egyptian pharaoh back in the day. And this guy was like the ultimate vizier. And so I just love little stuff like that. At least then you learn the person's name. And I know many historians will quibble with me on that fact because they dislike any kind of ahistoricity. But people have to learn it somehow, and if it's not entertaining, they're not going to learn it.
So we pull back from this grisly sort of execution scene and these two lovers being ripped asunder for all eternity, and we show up in the Department of Antiquities in Cairo, and we have sort of a mainstay of a lot of romance novels, the overqualified woman who's stuck in a job that she's too good for because she's a woman. So she's just the librarian, but she really just wants to be out there, doing excavations, but she can't.
Oh, so I love that that's a trope in romance novels, because I was marking tropes throughout this thing. So
Yeah.
We'll hit it from both sides.
Yeah.
Egypt is remarkably unexploded in this view of the city, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely.
I would have expected Egypt in the 1926 to be basically just what Lebanon looks like now, just rubble, because it was just fighting all the time.
And again, that's why, okay, this is supposedly after World War I, but the way things look, it sort of looks sort of older than that. But who cares? It looks great. And it is very sort of typical of the time, because you get into the 19th century and people started sort of reading the Bible as literature. They were looking at a bunch of like Greek and Roman literature as like, oh, hey, maybe this is a historical document. And so all of that sort of sciencey stuff that was getting developed in the 18th century, they started applying it to, the arts and like, maybe there's something to this. And so that is really the birth of modern archaeology, was sort of looking at all this ancient literature and thinking maybe there's something real about it.
And that takes us to the silly woman who destroys the library.
Yeah, whoever set up their bookcases so they just tip over like dominoes, I don't know, but it was a spectacular, ridiculous scene.
God damn, that was the dumbest scene in this movie. Honestly, I was borderline like, I'm gonna turn this piece of shit off right now. This is crazy, because these are the biggest bookshelves any human being's ever seen, and they're like out of some like red oak. They're humongous. They must weigh thousands of pounds a piece. And she's and I love the little balancing act. They have this little Buster Keaton. She's on a ladder in between two stacks of books, and then she balances perfectly upright, and she's trying not to fall over. Then falls into one and knocks over all the bookcases. And yeah, like you said, like, what did they do? Just top load all these bookcases and then call it a day?
Because it's that circle of dominoes, and all the bookcases fall down, and she knows her job is toast. And one of the best lines, she's like, it was an accident, and the director of the museum goes, no, Ramesses the First crushing Syria, that was an accident. This was a disaster.
You're worse than a plague of locusts.
Exactly.
They really, goddamn, in the noughties, they really love to establish that any pretty girl was going to be approachable by making her clumsy in the very first scene. Like, she's got to trip or rip her jacket, or trip and rip her jacket and fall into a puddle.
And she's wearing glasses, so you can't tell how pretty she is.
There you go. And that was the classic move in the 90s, especially on Saved by the Bell. Take a supermodel, put her in glasses, nerd.
Yeah.
Everybody will look. AC Slater's going to ignore her until she takes off those glasses like Clark Kent.
But then, so Evie, after destroying the library, she's in another part of the museum. And so there's just all of these antiquities that you can kind of climb over, and they're all put together higgledy-piggledy. And I mean, that is also dead on for the way all of these sort of like treasures were treated in the 19th century. You'd dig them up, you'd strip off all the gold, and then you'd put all of the wood and stone that nobody wanted into this museum, and it would just be all, you could just climb over shit.
Or you would take it home to Britain, and then you would keep like a kind of a little, it was like a sitting room, and you would make a little mini museum in your sitting room where you could take people after dinner parties and show them, well, these are the antiquities that I stole from these various countries.
Yes, exactly. And we get to meet the single most punchable brother, I think, in film history, just about.
You know, this motherfucker made it into 2 sequels after this? Oh my God.
But yeah, it's once again the trope, like the brother, because he's the boy, gets all the money and the access and everything and doesn't appreciate it and is a complete doofus, whereas the girl is, left to hard scrabble her way up. And anyway, once again, huge big trope here, but this time he might have found the key.
Ooh, yes, the key. There is a map. And there are also a lot of gas lamps in this scene, which one of them is conveniently used on the map, but I really enjoyed the gas lamps in all of the scenes. Like, I was really looking at the lighting, and they did such a great job of, like, placing candles where they needed to be so that there could, I mean, obviously there wouldn't be that much light in that region, but still, like, they were making it possible to have light, at least until you got underground, and then the whole thing went out the window.
Oh, yeah. But again, yeah, they're not going to have electric lighting in Egypt, even at this period of time. And so, yeah, it's all going to be oil lamps and candles and torches and all of that. And they did a great job with that. So we have the treasure map.
Ooh, if I may interrupt for one moment, so I looked up what Egypt's borders were in 1926, because I was just curious. When you talk about a country, it's not always the same country that you might, you know, just like if you were talking about America in 1776, it's way smaller. Well, Egypt in 1926 was pretty big, and it also explained how we got the current situation in Israel. So it was under Brit protection from 1882 to 1956. But it was ruled by an independent Ottoman state called the Khedivate of Egypt. And so the Brits fought for them, but they were sort of Ottoman. But it included Egypt, Sudan, South Sudan, Eritrea, Djibouti, northwest Somalia, northeast Ethiopia, Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, Greece, Cyprus, South and Central Turkey, parts of Libya, Chad, the Central African Republic, Congo, northwest Saudi Arabia, Yemen, and the Kingdom of Hejaz, which became the Israeli-Palestinian problem that exists today because it was Jordan's, Transjordan, and Iraq, but they had already ceded some of it to France, and so it caused all these problems in the region.
Oh, yeah. There's a million problems having to do with, if nothing else, just the egos of a bunch of European leaders and not really thinking about the people of the Middle East as actual entire human beings.
Or even partial human beings. The whole thing really came down to trying to be able to give travel visas to Christian people who wanted to go to Jerusalem. They had to finagle a way to do it, and so that's why they came up with this stupid-ass thing, which is just crazy. But
yeah, I mean, the problems caused, it's nuts. So anyway, so we get the treasure map and we find out that it belongs to an intrepid explorer who's in jail now. And so we get the jail and more romance novel nonsense as, this seedy looking, but under his seediness, handsome looking American, kisses her through the bars and is going to get killed. And she releases him at the last second. So again, comic book nonsense, left, right, center, up, down.
Oh, he just Donald Trump the shit out of this lady, though. He was like, she was like, what, you know where this treasure is? And he was like, yeah, come here. No closer. And then grabs her face and starts making out with her. It's like, what the fuck are you doing, man? How is sexual assault going to convince a woman to get you out of jail? It doesn't make any sense.
So don't you know, starting from basically when movies started, if you kiss a woman the right way, even if she hates your guts, she will just melt and turn into putty in your hands and she'll do everything you want. That's what movies...
He didn't even win a downhill ski race to earn this girl's affection. Come on now.
No, this...
And also, they would not have been keeping him in prison to hang him because they transported everybody to East Sudan to work in the mines until they died if they wanted them dead. They were gonna mine some gold before they did it.
But yeah, that was definitely some movie nonsense that was 100% carrying through the grand tradition of, I don't know, the movies that I ended up growing up watching. And we're still have a bad hangover about it.
Yeah, the movies that the movies that I grew up avoiding.
But yeah, because, it was, even though this is 1999, we are still in the era where girls actually admitting that they want to kiss someone was still a little iffy. So you just had to go in and read the signals, kind of.
Yeah. Everybody makes fun of my tried and true method up until now, when now they're making fun of Gen Z for people being like, is it okay if I put my hand on you, or should I maybe just keep my fucking hands to myself? I've always been like that because I can't read people for shit.
Right.
And I would rather ask and then know whether or not I should. I don't give a shit if it ruins the moment. You know what ruins the moment more? Touching a person when they don't want to be touched.
Right, and then they have to like try to figure out how to get out of it without being rude,
or without getting
causing
murdered,
more problems,
or without getting murdered. That's probably a big thought in the back of most girls' minds. I'd like to
and that's why we're trying to get out of it without like somebody saying, "Oh, you're being rude or crazy or whatever." And Gen Z is like, you know what? That's too tiring. We have way too many problems in this world to worry about that. How about we just simplify the shit out of it?
I love it.
Just
yeah.
Talk. Talk about it. Love it.
The world is melting, so let's move on to bigger issues, shall we? But instead of that, she's like, oh my God, this man's such a good, filthy kisser that I'm going to pay £500 to get him out of prison, which is $9,500 in today's money, in case anybody's curious.
Yeah, and so this also proving that she is just ridiculously wealthy to be able to take on...
Oh, yes.
And
also that it costs very little to get somebody out. I mean, it's kind of like a Mexican prison, I guess, in the U.S. Like, costs very little to get somebody out of prison.
Well, you know, those prison guards aren't making a lot of money. They are happy to take your money and get rid of like this annoying American who's just causing trouble, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, certainly. Get out of our house.
So they get on a steamship, they head up the Nile, which is, and so we have the classic race for the treasure. And so we get to meet some of the other fortune hunters, and they are just straight up American cowboys.
Well, you have skipped the people who are spying on them, however.
Oh, okay. Yes.
The Magi. And so the Magi, you might think, were a completely fictitious group of people. However, it is a generic term for the elite desert police that patrolled the deserts and the trade routes in Sudan, Egypt, and Eritrea.
Okay.
And so these like little ninja people who are constantly following them and kind of alternately meddling and helping them are actual real life people, kind of like the Chinese army had a group that patrolled the Silk Road as well. So this was the thing.
But yeah, so you're talking, the Magi in here are protecting the secret city on the treasure map to stop it from being dug up because, you dig up the secret city of the dead, Hamunaptra, and all hell breaks loose. And they don't want that to happen, so.
Exactly. And I'm glad that you're saying all these words so I don't have to butcher their pronunciations.
But yeah, so we get on, the race is on to go find Hamunaptra, to go find, the city of the dead where all of the cool treasures are buried. And yeah, we get the straight up cowboy soldiers of fortune racing, Evie and Brendan Fraser as Rick O'Connell and the very punchable brother. And I mean, this sort of...
Oh, and that incredibly distasteful... I mean, he is the greatest heel ever in a film.
Benny?
The little Renfield guy?
Yes.
God, he is disgusting. Oh, I don't even know what his name is in that movie.
Benny.
Holy shit. He is the most detestable bad guy in a movie. Like, he's like a cartoon character. You're like, I hate him. I hate him.
Oh, yeah, we call him Daffy Duck. He is the Daffy Duck of this movie.
He is the Daffy Duck of this movie.
So they're on this steamship, heading up the Nile, going off to it, and the secret Magi, this is where I was going to say, the secret Magi, appears on the boat and, says, all right, where is this map and this key? Because you shouldn't have it and you have to give it to me. And of course goes after Evie because a mysterious guy in mysterious black clothing mysteriously restraining the heroine of the movie is sort of how you get the next action sequence to start going.
I really have to appreciate the fact that these desert peoples are such badasses at amphibious assault. They took a ship. They took a ship on the move, and And then Brendan Fraser did a thing that you only saw in the late 90s, back before 9/11, and we got so obsessed with the military in the United States and everything got so
right
intense with the military.
Has to be exacty.
But yeah. I think it was probably much more realistic gun handling in this film, like with Brendan Fraser running around double fisting 9/11s and shooting at people. It was a big thing in cowboy movies back in the day, but nobody ever shoots like that in real life. And it must come from Kurosawa films, which then went to cowboy films, because they did the dual wielding stuff in Kurosawa films. But you don't see it in modern movies. So when I was watching Brendan Fraser do this, I was like, oh my God, whew, this movie's 90s as hell.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I'm sure it was partly the Kurosawa films. And then you also had a lot of the sort of movie stars in the spaghetti westerns, John Wayne and his sort forward, who had no real gun knowledge or military knowledge. They were just movie stars, and they just wanted stuff to look cool on film. They didn't care how these things actually worked. Yeah.
Well, Bruce Willis was big on doing that at this time. And Brendan Fraser, on the way out of the room in this scene when the Medjai's attacking him, he's shooting both pistols, and he's kind of making a face, cutting a face and looking to the side, which is exactly what Bruce Willis does he does it in Die Hard, and he also does it in the amazing film Last Man Standing. But that's like his signature weird ass face that he cuts. But that's what happens when you get a guy who grew up in New York City, never handled a gun, and started out on soap operas, and then you put him in action films.
Yeah.
He's gonna do dumb shit.
Well, those guns are really loud. You kind of cringe away from them.
But then you absolutely can't see what you're not hitting by shooting two guns at the same time.
But
and the knife they're being attacked by with the Medjai guy. Yeah. This is even more fun than the dumbass guns. It's a curved serrated knife.
Yeah.
It's an Arab knife used for cutting melons.
But it looks real cool on screen, so we're going to go with that one.
It does. It's like a Wolverine claw with a serrated edge.
So fight on the boat kills the boat.
I'm going to cut you like a melon.
But the fight on the boat kills the boat, so they have to get off the boat, and the cowboys and Benny are on one side, and Brendan Fraser and Evie are on the other side, and they both go to the city to get outfitted and go out into the desert. And so we get
those people set fire to their own boat, by the way, which I found, which was insane. Like, a fire on a boat is the biggest crisis a person could possibly have. You're surrounded by undrinkable water. You're going to die. You're going to be burned and drowned at the same time, and you're going to have salt water in your burns. Like, people on boats don't let a fire happen while they fight. They'll stop the fire and then start fighting again. But you got to get the fucking fire out. These people were like, oh, we'll fight to the death and then swim to the shore, which I don't think ever happened.
Yeah. And in this case, if you you're just in a river and you can swim to the side, but it's like you're in the middle of nowhere. Like, there is nothing, nowhere, anywhere along the edges of the Nile except like tiny little pitiful farming towns.
Yeah. And so just to impress upon the listener how important it was to not have a fire on a boat, fire extinguishers were invented by a ship's captain to prevent the fires on ships. Yeah, they were really that important. So it was really funny to me when they were all just like fighting, completely ignoring the blazing inferno behind them.
Again, total comic book nonsense. And the comic book nonsense continues as they show up in this, this desert town to sort of head out for the last leg of the journey to Hamunaptra. They get some camels.
After surviving the night in the desert, sopping wet, which they all would have died of frostbite, or some kind of exposure, because the desert goes down to like 25 degrees at night.
Well, it depends on the time of year.
I think that's the average, though, 25 degrees. I mean, it would depend on the time of the year, but they would be in rough shape regardless. It gets cold in the desert. Well, I guess it was summer. Right?
Yeah, it can get very cold in the desert, but also traveling at night. I mean, one of the things that they do get right is traveling at night instead of during the middle of the day. You would very often travel under a full moon just because, you're not getting parched and messed up by the sun.
Plus, I guess in the desert, it would be very easy to navigate by starlight.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and So that is one thing that they got right. One thing that they got so very wrong is the clothes the men are wearing. Those work. They've got hats on. They've got, the different sort of scarves wrapped around their head. That all works. But they've got Evie in, like, the dress, I guess, is okay. But they put some weirdo gauze veil on her face. And just as with Sophie, losing my mind, hair is uncovered. And in this case, that is insane.
Bonnetless. I didn't realize we were still in bonnet times here.
Well, no, it's not so much bonnet times. Like, nobody would go out into the desert during the day or night and just with nothing on your head. Like, nobody did that.
Okay.
And the fact that they have no sun hat for her at all that's absurd. It's not even about the bonnet. It's being out in the desert sun all day with no head covering at all. And that just...
You just be burned to pieces.
Nobody did that. Nobody does that.
Yeah. There was no sunblock.
Yeah.
And the sand would probably get to cutting your skin after a while, too. You can only take so much exfoliation.
Right. Yeah. So... That wasn't so much about the bonnet. That was just like, seriously, nobody is going out into the desert with nothing on their head and face at all. Because between the sand and the sun.
Well, luckily for us, this was the only woman in the film with an uncovered head, because she was the only woman in the film. The only one.
Oh, there were women in the background, but they were all covered, as they should have been.
Oh, okay. Well, I didn't even see another, except for, I guess, the woman at the beginning, but I think Rachel Weisz might have been the woman at the beginning, right?
Oh, Noxune and Moon? No, that's a different actress.
Oh, okay. It wasn't no.
But yeah, so we get to the edge of Hamunaptra, and the cowboys show up, and they've got their camels and their Egyptologists, and they have a ridiculous camel race to get to the city of the dead.
Oh. My God. So this was the exact year that Rat Race came out. And so I will say that I did enjoy some dumbass races in films in the late 90s, but they were very, very overdone. And this horses versus camels race was incredibly stupid.
But, it is true that racing camels are a thing. So, there's that.
Oh, they are. And I would imagine that it would be much more comfortable to ride on a camel at 40 miles an hour than it would be to ride on the back of a horse at 40 miles an hour. But
I actually have no idea.
No? I've only sat on a camel. I've never ridden one. Like, he wasn't moving.
Okay.
He was just... But it was quite comfortable. I mean, sitting on a horse feels very different than sitting on a camel. When you sit on a camel, you feel like you're sitting on the back of, like, the world's hardest couch. Whereas when you sit on the back of a horse, you feel like you're sitting on a big dog, kind of. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I've never sat on a camel, and the camel saddles that they have in here, are like decently accurate, and so I don't know. But anyway, so they do get to the city, and we get to see one of the actual tricks that actual archaeologists were using in the 19th century to light underground.
The
mirrors.
The mirrors, yes. Which I was actually going to suggest that we could include The Fifth Element because of their use of mirrors in that. But I think they were just using like a brass plate or something. Yeah, he was using a very highly shined brass plate in that to shine light on the wall. But yeah, right. That was really cool. I really liked the mirrors.
Yeah, because back when you didn't have like light strung through stuff, you could set up mirrors to reflect light into a dark place. I mean, you would have to have your little servant kids up there constantly adjusting them because, the earth keeps turning, and so the angle of the sun keeps changing, and so you have to keep adjusting the outside mirror to get the light to bounce in there.
Yeah, you're like catching ricochets of light. If you want to picture this in your head, It would be like if you're trying to like ricochet a laser to hit a target, but you have to go around walls and stuff.
Yeah.
So you're setting up mirrors, so it bounces off different mirrors. That's what you're doing with this light. So you can basically have a flashlight because you don't have your cell phone.
Right. And yes, and this was actually really something that archaeologists did to bring light underground, because you didn't want to bring your candle or your lantern or whatever and get the pictures that you were looking at all sooty and smoky, which is what would happen if you brought candles and torches and everything down there.
Yeah, and I think this is really a good point for us to point out that for any Ancient Aliens fans out there, where ancient alien theorists would speculate that aliens had given them batteries and electric light, and that's why you didn't have any soot marks on the ceilings of those underground spots, which was very definitively posited by many people, and Graham Hancock thought that the Baghdad battery was doing like flashlights for them. But no, it was just fucking mirrors. It was just mirrors.
Yeah.
The Baghdad battery can't power a flashlight.
No, the Baghdad battery makes you go, ah! I mean, it works as a great, trick of the supernatural, especially when nobody understands electrolysis. But no.
Yeah, it allowed them to do electroplating, and you could give a small shock to your friend as a goof.
Yes. But, and it also leaves out, like, the glass tech that they had at the time. They weren't making light bulbs, and they didn't have filaments, and how did they make the vacuum, huh?
Then they'll show you that dumbass Stela that they think is a light bulb. I'm sure you've seen it. Oh, my God.
And they have the one that they think is an astronaut. I'm just like, these people who are making these have 1,000 stories you know nothing about. And it's a pity because those stories are way more fun than just distilling everything down to astronauts. Just stop. Stop it. Okay. So then, in every sort of competition movie like this where you have two sides going after it, they have the cowboys and then our heroes trying to dig up the dead and fight back and forth. There's a little bit of fun with different booby traps that they were finding in the tomb, which is historically accurate, that these pharaohs and rich people would put different types of booby traps in their tombs to discourage grave robbers, which would just dig around the other side and steal everything out the back. So it was very uncommon for the booby traps to actually work. But having like false entrances and pits you could fall down and all that stuff, like, yes, that is real. That did happen.
Yeah. And so they had these trap doors that would fall into place. And when Egyptologists were excavating them, they could see that I'm just explaining a little further what you were just talking about. They could see that the grave robbers knew where these huge, like, granite stone doors were, and so they would just cut through the limestone walls to go around the doors rather than having to deal with this door falling on them and crushing them, which was a real problem when you're building with limestone.
Yeah. I mean, the thing was that they would go ahead and they would create these tombs, and then it would be just like within a year or two that the graves would be robbed. So like finding an intact tomb, it wasn't like somebody had just robbed it, 50 years ago or 100 years ago. No, these tombs were robbed in antiquity, quite possibly by like the flunkies of the priests locals who did the burying. I mean, nothing was safe.
And this is where we get the trope for all the hidden passages and all that shit. And it's probably where the idea for hidden passages and castles and things came from as well.
Well, I don't know. I mean, like the hidden passages and castles, a lot of times they were sort of done as like ways for the important people to escape. And also, you had the back,
servants, you said.
Like you had, as people got richer, they didn't want their servants sort of walking like the nice hallway. And so they'd have the back hallway. And so sometimes the servant stairs would get confused as like a secret passage.
That would be a pretty cool flex, to be serving dinner to people and like no servants are around. And then all of a sudden they just pop up behind one of your guests like, oh, would you like some more water? And, fuck! Like, where the fuck did you come from? They're just coming out of holes in the walls.
They just come out from behind the tapestry. Yeah.
Exactly. But in this film, they booby trapped a couple of the cowboys get melted by a booby trap.
Salt acid.
So, science teacher, tell us about salt acids. Is that possible?
I think what they're referring to here is there are some salts that when dissolved in water create acid immediately. They're called acidic salts. I'm not sure what sort of imaginary face melting thing this was, because there aren't really that many acids out there, especially in the 19th and early 20th century, that are that caustic. I mean, the worst one is something called aqua regia, which is a combination of sulfuric and hydrochloric acid, and that can actually dissolve gold.
That was invented by alchemists, right? Aqua regia?
Yeah. The alchemists have all sorts of like crazy names. They didn't have any sort of like systemic chemical categorization. And so when you're researching science right along that sort of like 17th, 18th century line, you get stuff that has like 19 names for one compound because everybody who figured it out gave it their own name.
Ah, gotcha.
And so like the Germans had their name, the French had their name, the Austrians had their name, the Arabs had their name, everybody had their own name for the thingy, and it depended on which system you were working in.
That seems to happen a lot. I think that technology really is the thing that drives the evolution and the spread of language, it seems. So when people are like trying to figure out, I just watched a documentary about the extinction of all these languages, and I was like, they lack the capacity to describe the things around us, and that's why they're going extinct. That if you're a Stone Age culture and you can't describe electricity, how the hell are you going to use that language to do it?
Right. You end up with like this weird compound mishmash of whatever.
Or you can just adopt English.
Yeah. Or French or German or Chinese.
Yeah. But you'd have to adopt a language that would have, say, ammonium chloride in it so that you could talk about salt acids.
There you go.
Research.
And this is where we start to get into some of like the practical special effects and some of the early CGI. And I think this movie does really well in not pushing the special effects that they have beyond their capability.
If you say so.
Like, I just feel like the special effects they're pretty cheesy, but they hold up to what they were trying to do. And I don't know. I'm always a fan of a good Harryhausen mummy.
Yeah, see, I really felt like this was a movie that could have gone with more like stop motion effects, things like that, because it seemed like they used them slightly, but not much. So
because they were right, like 1999 was right on the edge of like when they were starting to get to do CGI. So they did like the CGI scarab beetles and like the mysterious black cloud and everything, but they were still using practical effects. And so you got the buried alive guy gets unearthed and they're like, he's juicy. Yeah. Which, I don't know. For me, that's a real fun moment.
It was a... Yeah, I looked up a bunch of stuff about this film, and there were a lot of people bitching about the lack of texture and the CGI, and it's like, they were using like a Microsoft computer that you couldn't even find a computer that had this little computing power that they managed to make that thing with. So take some deep breaths. Like, your cell phone is a supercomputer, and they lacked any of its capacity.
Yeah, and so like when they did use CGI, they had it sort of moving fast and like going quickly, and just they weren't trying to populate entire backgrounds with it and make us believe characters people were interacting with dialogue and everything were realistic. Like, no. Just don't do that.
No, well, I mean, none of it was realistic anyway. I mean, Brendan Fraser certainly could have wooed Rachel Weisz in real life, but not using the methods he used in this film, I don't think.
Poor late 19th century, early 20th century women are still like, well, I guess we have to be happy with what vestiges of romance we get, and because it's not really going to get any good for a while.
Well, he had all these opportunities to rape me and didn't, so I guess he's the best guy I've ever met.
Right. When she was too drunk to consent, he just put her to bed. Look at that.
And that was weird. Then all of a sudden he turns into this noble guy. She goes to kiss him and then passes out in his lap, and he's like, oh, no, I'm going to carry this woman to bed.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, when he's in a cage, he's just like, grab him by the pussy.
Yeah, I don't know.
You're supposed to know it all, especially since this is romance novel territory here. One thing I'd like to point out is that at one point, one of the little like side character guys goes, I hate bugs. And I don't think a person in the 19th century ever would have even thought to say that. That'd be like saying I hate water or I hate breathing.
Yeah, they're just everywhere.
So there were no pesticides.
I mean, in the back of every single 19th century cookbook is a whole section on like how to get the fleas and earwigs and everything out of your stuff.
Yeah.
For spring cleaning. There's like recipes for it.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. Oh yeah, no, the back section of 19th and early 20th century cookbooks are all these like household chemicals. Like how do you make, stuff to polish your knives and black your shoes and, make your linens fresh. Yeah. Like there's a whole recipe section for household chemicals in the back of all of these older cookbooks.
Well, that would explain the spate of women chemists in the early 1900s then, huh?
Oh, yeah, yeah. I mean, because
their chemistry book was their, like, what were those books called? Housekeeping books.
Well,
they were like recipes and...
it was a cookbook. I mean, they were just cookbooks.
Oh, okay.
And they just included this extra section that as household cleaning chemicals sort of started to come onto the market and become... something you could buy, you didn't need that in the back of your cookbook anymore.
Ah, that's fun.
Or it might be like a housekeeping manual is maybe what you're thinking of.
Okay, all right. Well, I guess that would just go next to the cookbook on the on the shelf. But still, they're learning science in the house, which is really cool.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, they understand like bleaching and bluing and when sugar and salt will and won't dissolve and burning different. Yeah, they have a whole different set of stuff that they're figuring out, what's soluble in alcohol and all that jazz.
We need to write a 19th century MacGyver and pitch that to like NBC.
So back to the movie, we finally sort of get the magic book and the magic key together. And I mean, there's just a lot of comic book nonsense that just goes on. And
oh yeah, especially because by the time they're looking for the golden book, right? Have we gotten to the cat yet?
I think doesn't that happen like after they release the mummy and like try to go back to town and all that jazz?
Yeah, I wasn't sure where we were in it, so
there's just a lot of business that goes on that
But the fact that cats save the day and cats will keep this mummy away and cats are like. They're going to save everyone at all times. And Egyptians loved cats so much that they lost a war to the Persians, and the Persians owned Egypt for 200 years because Egyptians love cats so much. So there are cats everywhere. They could have solved this problem halfway through the movie by simply holding a cat.
And they didn't know it. Well, and it makes sense that the Egyptians, as such a...
But they have a cat!
Right.
Who they just leave on the fucking boat or in the room or wherever. I don't know. They got that white cat. It's only in one scene. They just keeps getting into the suitcase while Brendan Fraser's like, we're leaving. And she's like, we're not leaving. We're going to save the world.
But I mean, it makes sense that the Egyptians were so cat obsessed because they were a grain-based society. And so you'd have all the rodents like getting into your grain. So of course you want cats around to stop the rodents from eating all of your food.
Plus they are wonderful and beautiful and soft. And
yes, they are. Cats are the best. Yes. So yeah, we release the mummy and we find the big treasure room. And yeah, so this is where we're into the comic book nonsense. And the mummy is sort of resurrecting himself and he's sucking other people's body parts and vital juices up. And he
But was she wearing a bonnet while he was juicing himself?
Gets juicy again. Humans up.
Oh, and the mummy was defeated with a kiss. We needed Huey Lewis in the news because with the amount of stupid kiss scenes that happened in this, we at least needed one rendition of Feel the Power of Love. You know?
There you go.
Oh my God, there were so many stupid kissing scenes in this film.
But it was a lot of fun to have Benny, the Daffy Duck of the show, kind of with all of his different amulets. The way he doesn't get killed by the mummy is he's got a Star of David, and they're like, "Oh, you wear the amulet of the slaves. Will you be my slave?" And he's like, "Well, if I won't be dead, sure, yeah, I'll totally be your flunky."
Well, I loved that scene because it's the gross little Renfield guy, and he goes through. He has a neck full of chains, like he is like the most religious Mr. T, and it's for each religion. And in each religion, he says a prayer in that language. He even does Buddha, and he starts speaking Cantonese, and it's amazing until he finally gets to the Jewish one, and then the guy's like, "Oh, oh, I know this one. Yeah, we can work with this. And he's like,
Yeah.
oh, yay. The fact that a polymath finally paid off.
Yes, I will. Anything to not die, including just totally being your flunky. And so, yeah, Benny hosts the partially rehumanized mummy back in his room. And the mask that they put him in there is a lot of fun because that is similar to what wealthy people who got leprosy in the Middle East would wear when they would meet with people.
Okay, so it's like a dark, it was black, sort of midnight bluish, and it was just it was basically like the faceplate you would see like a Caesar wear or something like that.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and so it was a metal mask sort of made to look like a face, and so there were a couple of kings of
but
Jerusalem,
real kind of austere, not necessarily threatening, but almost threatening in its austerity.
Right, but it was like a face would sort of be punched into the metal plate. And if you were lower class and you had leprosy, they'd just toss you into the leper colony. But if you're upper class and had leprosy and your face was getting eaten away, you would have one of these metal masks made, and just with like the eye holes. And so you could sort of be in polite company.
Man, and to think, I didn't even know what leprosy was until a couple of years ago. And it's just basically the inability to heal from injuries, right? So anytime you cut yourself or whatever, it gets infected and then festers.
Right. Yeah. It's a bacterial infection. It's easily treatable today, but it is endemic in parts of the world because rich assholes, are too greedy to go ahead and just, provide people this medicine. And some people are naturally immune from leprosy.
Oh, what is the medicine that they used in that day? Or did they have an effective medicine that worked prior to the modern era?
No.
They just put them in colonies, right?
Right. And so you would have people who would work in the colonies who would never get leprosy. And those are the people who just have a natural immunity to it. And I haven't read up on leprosy in a long time and I forget all the details, but this was a common thing. You would have sort of these nuns and priests and prisoners who would end up sort of caring for the lepers as this bacterial infection would slowly eat away at their flesh.
Yum. Jesus, what a horrible way to... And they were feeling that the whole time. It wasn't like they lost the ability to feel pain, right?
No. Oh, no, your nerves go dead. In fact, that's part of how the leprosy advances, is that because you lose feeling in your extremities, you'll like burn yourself or cut yourself and not feel it, and the disease will advance. Yeah. So no, it's not painful. Well, I mean, there's aspects of it that are painful, but it's not painful the way you're thinking about it.
Wow. That's even grosser and more horrible than I thought it was.
I'm always here to tell you it could be worse, Jamie.
Yo, that's why you always gotta have a science teacher in the crew to bring the gross. When all else fails, just start talking about infectious parasites. You'll get them to puke.
Oh, yes. But yeah, so the mummy comes to Cairo and you meet with the Magi, and this is like one of the few times in American movies where you have basically an Arab good guy who turns out not to be either secretly white or secretly half white.
Oh, you're talking about Carlos from Resident Evil, right? The Magi head?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so he ends up helping to like stop this mummy who's going to take over the world and reinstate the 1,000 years of darkness, or, sort of whatever curse is going to happen. This is another trope that you saw in romance novels forever, is you would have the Arab sheikh or whatever who you would mysteriously meet and fall in love with, but then it turned out to be okay because they were actually secretly white, had gone native, or, their father was secretly English and they had just like grown up with their mother's people being adventurous in the desert. And so the fact that they don't make this guy like half white or secretly white, I was like, that's kind of a new thing to do, even though it was in the 2000s.
Huh. You're right. That was, I will say, before Islamophobia really hit in 2001, though. So
yeah,
he probably wouldn't have gotten the same treatment 3 years later. But
no,
they definitely had him in the right spot here.
Yeah. America was hating on somebody else at this point. Every decade we find somebody else to be a dick to. That's kind of our thing.
Hey, why not? Spread it around. And you know what I noticed so when we're getting towards the end of this film,
right.
and it was a trope in a lot of films, and I really felt like it kind of turned into a bad version of Army of Darkness by the end, because there were a lot of things that were pulled directly from Army of Darkness, and I found out why after the movie was over. But like if you're going to do a magical ritual,
sure,
one would assume pronunciation would play heavily into the effectiveness of that invocation. I would assume. It would be like trying to win a karaoke competition, but you don't know the tune. You just know the words. Like, you're not going to do that. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, and especially, with all these ancient incantations, they were barely written down, and a lot of the way sort of language was written down early on was sort of like a notation to sort of remind you rather than written exactly. I mean, that's why ancient Egyptian has no vowels.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah. That's why you will see like different pronunciations for a bunch of like these Egyptian pharaohs and place names and everything, or artifacts. One of the more famous is the little like people that they would bury with them to be their servants in the afterlife, like little carved dolls, basically. And you'll see that written as Ushebti or Shawabti, because like there's no vowels in there, and so you would. Like the people who were saying it and writing it at the time, they knew how it was pronounced. So this was just more of a reminder that it was the thingy. The full pronunciation of the thing wasn't there.
Kind of like how we can read a word. You can read a sentence even if you just know the first couple of words of each word, because you can figure out the word from the context. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so, I mean, even today, people are still fighting over the correct pronunciation of a bunch of ancient Egyptian words. So, yeah.
Well, and also, like, the people in Kush spoke an entirely different language, but used that alphabet.
Right.
So, you saying the Egyptian words for what the Kushites were trying to write isn't going to do shit.
Oh, absolutely. It's sort of like when you look at today, even though French and English use the same alphabet, the way they use the letters, entirely different.
There you go. So we've completely poked any hole. If you guys out there are trying to invoke any demons, you're going to have to learn the language that the original invocation was written in.
Yeah. So, you're going to call up the wrong one, and it's not going to go well for you.
Nope.
But yeah, the end of the movie does pretty much disintegrate into like just adventures that keep going and keep going and keep going on for too long. I will absolutely grant you that.
Oh my God, it was almost as bad as the goddamn Hobbit movies. It's like, all right, well, this is a logical conclusion. Oh my fucking God, we still got 25 minutes to go? How?
And then, you have since it is still the naughties, we have the required, damsel in distress tied up to the something and rapidly disintegrating clothing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is the time when they've got to outrun explosions and traps, and everybody was in phenomenal shape back in the day because they could outrun every exploding or collapsing thing in the world. And this was an exploding, collapsing tomb under the ground that swallowed the entire city that had existed previously. And in doing so, giving everyone their just desserts.
Yes, including Benny, who wouldn't leave the treasure behind, and so he gets buried with it, which for me was the ultimate Daffy Duck moment. There's a great Daffy Duck and Bugs Bunny cartoon when they're in King Solomon's mines, and Daffy Duck won't leave the treasure behind, and so.
Oh well, there you go. He is.
That's what's
full
going
circle
on
here.
Yeah.
He didn't just get buried alive. He was buried alive with those flesh-eating
scarab beetles.
Scarabs.
Yes.
And the sound of those scarabs made my birds go crazy. So it was like the most insane cacophony as that man was dying. It was pretty impressive.
Oh, yeah.
They were going crazy to that sound.
Yes, and then we get to the end and still have the most punchable brother in the world. The Arab turns out to be the good guy, and Evie and Rico.
And he thanks them in Arabic, and they're like, yeah, Arabic works for me. Assalamu alaikum. Whatever you said, buddy. And then the brother comes in with, I guess we go home empty-handed again. And then Brendan Fraser goes, not really. Smooch. Smooch, smooch.
But I don't know. As just a total popcorn movie, this was it. And as an illustration of how, the 19th century was viewing the mysterious East and the treasures of the world. I mean, in the 15th, 16th, and even 17th centuries, it was sort of the agricultural treasures of the world, the spices and sugar and coffee and tea and all of that stuff. And then you got into sort of the 18th century and the 19th century. It's like, we've got other treasures out there. And as India was sort of falling apart under the British Raj, like all of this gold and jewels was starting to come out, and people were setting up like the diamond mines in South Africa, and you'd had all of like the gold mines in the Americas and the silver mines in the Americas. And so now we get into the 19th century and people are really mining the past for the treasures that were made in the past.
And just for the knowledge of the past, because the Renaissance, everybody was so deep into Greek and Roman history and mythology and just learning all of the classics. And so the second they had the opportunity to go to these different places and say, yo, what do you got? What books do you have? We got printers. Let's make this happen. Let's figure out what the fuck these books say. Because they wanted all that secret hidden knowledge. And it's kind of like when the internet happened and I was like, oh my God, fucking Wikipedia. I don't ever have to leave my house again. I can know everything. Everything will be mine. And I feel like that was kind of like that for these rich guys who all of a sudden could take a steamship, and what used to take 9 months now is like 3 weeks on a train and 2 weeks on a ship, and they can get there.
Right. Yeah. It was the steamships and coal powered trains. And yeah, all of a sudden you had this like much more reliable transportation that would get you there when you got there. And then, knowledge was starting to move around because you had pulpwood paper. You had paper from trees that was so much cheaper to make, so much faster to make. And you could just sort of start spreading written knowledge out there in the world. Yeah, the world exploded in terms of like who could know what.
Yeah. And just like with the internet now, bullshit exploded too. So this is when you get the flat earth theory, which was created by a man with like a dozen kids specifically so he could feed those dozen kids by spreading bullshit around because people would pay to hear anything.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that is one of the problems with Netflix being invented is every idiot could get their movie up there and out there for people to see. But before it was invented, everybody would just go to some, lecture hall and hear whatever somebody was spouting because there was nothing going on.
Yeah, so you had to go all the way out of your house to get your local Joe Rogan. Yo, so unbelievably, this film spawned 2 sequels, a spin-off, and a reboot.
Yes.
Did you know it had 2 sequels? I thought there was only 1. I thought it was just The Mummy Returns.
Oh, no, I was a big Brendan Fraser fan in the day, so I saw them all. They got
So you've seen the Michelle Yeoh, Jet Li, and Maria Bello. Oh my God, I love Maria Bello from Payback. Oh, I love her so much. You've seen Mummy 3, Tomb of the Dragon Emperor.
So there was The Mummy Return. Yeah, no, I did. I only saw that one once because like The Mummy Returns, that was kind of fun. And then the third one, you're like, oh, okay, well, it was definitely the least memorable. I mean, I actually have seen The Scorpion King, the spinoff, more than once.
Oh, we watched that in the last 6 months, and my God, that's a piece of shit. Oof.
But it was a big breakout for The Rock playing. That was.
Well, I think The Mummy Returns was really kind of where he got his break, right? Because wasn't he in that too? I've never seen that one either.
No,
I thought The Mummy Returns was the same cast plus The Rock. And then they did The Scorpion King where they just got rid of the rest of the Brendan Fraser shit and went into the past for The Rock.
Yeah, I haven't rewatched the sequels all that much. Yep, he was in The Mummy Returns. You're right. And then he got sort of his big star. He got to star in his own movie, in The Scorpion King. And yeah. I mean, and that was super popcorny as well, for sure.
Yes, it was. So, have you seen Stephen Sommers' other films? Because he has a lot of films we could do. Like Oz the Great and Powerful. Have you seen that one?
No, I don't think I've seen a lot of his movies.
Well, that's where we get the Army of Darkness crossover, because it stars, well, Bruce Campbell's in it, along with Ted Raimi, who did the Xena movie, or the Xena TV show. Sam Raimi directs it. Listen to who else is in this. Mila Kunis, James Franco the Rapist, Rachel Weisz, Joey King, who was the cute little evil woman in Bullet Train, the bad guy woman, the real slender girl.
Yeah.
And Zach Braff, the guy from Scrubs.
Oh, wow. Holy cow.
Yeah, so we might have to watch that one. So he did Oz the Great and Powerful. He also did Huck Finn and some other Huck Finn movie, which are both in our time period. We've got The Jungle Book, it stars Jason Scott Lee, who was from The Dragon. He played Bruce Lee. Carrie Elwes is in that from Princess Bride. And Jason Fleming, who was in League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. He was Jekyll and Hyde. And then there's the apocalyptically bad Van Helsing, starring Hugh Jackman and Kate Beckinsale, which I refuse to watch again.
I don't know if I'll be able to watch that. But, I mean, The Great and Powerful Oz matters because L. Frank Baum, the guy who wrote all the Oz books, was another 19th century figure. So, yeah.
And that book really inspired a lot of the fiction, even though I hate to admit that a lot of the fiction that I love is inspired by Oz. Like, that story inspired a lot of the weird fiction and the science fiction and the horror fiction that you get now. People loved that book back in the day. And if you were into weird shit, you were into that book.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know a whole ton about him. I mean, I there's like scholars on his stuff, but he definitely sort of was a seed for a lot of the fantasticism as an American author that was coming out of that period. I mean, and again, we were sort of talking a little bit back in the Barnum movie that because scientific stuff was happening so fast, it was really difficult for people to tell the difference between is this possible and is this not. Trains happened to people, and all of a sudden you start to get electricity. Like, maybe ESP is real, like this, and people with heads for pumpkins. I mean, you don't know.
Anything is possible.
Right. And it is really hard to tell the difference between what was made up and what wasn't, because, you know, the stranger than fiction genre was definitely coming out.
And you also had all of those spiritualists who were going around and doing all their various humbugs of, seances and all that craziness. So they're using practical special effects to scare the shit out of people in real life on and out.
Yes. And then life was sort of more scary and threatening than it is today. And so people knew fear.
Yeah. So that might be a fun one to watch. I mean, it's only produced by Stephen Sommers, and it's Sam Raimi, so we could be in for some. Plus, it's Bruce Campbell, and we all want to be his best friend. So.
Bruce Campbell is fun,
yes,
for sure.
Oh, and I have one other suggestion of a film that I've seen already, but it is a stark counterpoint to this one. It's called The Duel.
Okay.
And it is about a phenomenon called the Helena Duel from Texas. And it is a town in Texas that for quite a long time resolved all of its disputes rather than going to court. They would tie the two gentlemen's left hands together, put a knife in their right hand that was no longer than like 6 inches, and then they would just stab each other until they both died. Oh. Yeah, so that's a thing, and it involved the Texas Rangers, and it's quite a film. So there's another one we could watch at some point.
At some point. Okay.
That one's Woody Harrelson and Liam Hemsworth. So you get nice eye candy. Yeah, see, I got you with Liam Hemsworth, because I know you like Liam better than the hotter brother. You like the wrong brother. I got you.
Well, the whole Hemsworth thing.
You guys can't see her face, but she went, damn!
The Hemsworth thing also cracks me up because from The Good Place, they invented an extra Hemsworth brother who thought of himself as like super inadequate because he was just like a pediatric surgeon or something. And he's like, I'm not beautiful like my brothers.
Boy, they are beautiful.
Okay.
Well, I think that's it. What are we doing next? Are we going back into Warrior?
I think it's time to go back into Warrior. We got to get caught up so we're ready to go when it's season 4, because everybody else out there has watched season 3 and I haven't, and clearly that's a problem and it needs to be fixed.
Well, I've only watched half of season 3 because trying to watch it while we were recording season 2 completely destroyed my ability to follow the plot line. So I haven't seen 3 or 4.
When did this happen?
Yes. So, all right. Well, that wraps it up, I guess.
Okay. We will be back with episode 1 of season 3.
Season 3.
All right. Well, sounds good. We will see everybody next week.
All right. Until then, guys, have a good one.
All right. Bye-bye. You can find more of Jamie and how he can make you stronger at plagueofstrength.com. You can learn more about old American food on my other podcast, The History of American Food. We're on Instagram at PCG Podcast. And you can always reach out to us by email at pcgpodcasters@gmail.com. And you can find more dope beats like this one from royalraven.com.